Hello, and welcome to this edition of Breaking the Cycle. I'm District Attorney Tim Cruz.
And I'm Sheriff Joe McDonald.
It's nice to be with you today. The issue of opiate and prescription drug abuse knows no boundaries. Sheriff McDonald and I had ideas of what issues we would face as members of law enforcement, but I can honestly say that I did not expect it to be an issue so great, affecting so many people as the current opiate and prescription drug epidemic that we've all found ourselves in. We use words like epidemic and crisis to describe the issue because we're at that point. The numbers are staggering. Plymouth County is not immune. In 2014, the State Police Detective Unit investigating homicides in my office investigated 73 suspected fatal overdoses from opiates. In 2015, we had a total of 142. Today in 2016, we stand at 86. And that number is only the cases that my state police respond to. That number does not include other cases that local police or emergency departments handle on their own.
At one time, I would have reported the number of men incarcerated for drug or alcohol abuse at a much lower rate than I do today. So many personal and property crimes are a result of drug and alcohol abuse. It is safe to say that well over 70% of the men serving time at the House of Correction are with us because of activities directly related to their addiction.
As a result, last year, the sheriff and I formed the Plymouth County Drug Abuse Task Force. The task force is comprised of members from law enforcement, the medical community, substance abuse experts, clergy, and community coalitions. We're all working together to share data from around our county that will assist us in tracking the trends of this epidemic and brainstorming ideas on how to address them. We've learned a lot in the regular meetings of the task force.
The Governor's Opioid Working Group reconvened last week, and we looked at the action items that were accomplished. To name just two, I am pleased to share that the PMP, the Prescription Monitoring Program, has undergone major changes, allowing physicians greater ease to access and also to update that system. This is a major advancement in information sharing to help stop the shopping of physicians for prescription meds that are being abused. The Governor also announced the first in the nation partnership with a chain pharmacy to pilot a drug take-back program here in the Commonwealth. That store is Walgreens. Public awareness has greatly improved. We are doing a better job identifying our problem and on the awareness and to some extent the prevention side. But we have a lot of work ahead of us, and so many people beyond the addict are suffering.
There are so many facets to this epidemic, ones that sometimes we forget to consider. One of those is the lifetime and long-term effects of childhood maltreatment and neglect, as well as parental substance abuse. There are large numbers of children who are growing up with a parent or parents with an addiction.
I am so pleased to see the work coming out of our task force that shares the heightened awareness of what kids are experiencing and how important it is for the schools to be as much of the safety net as they legally can.
What are the effects on these children, on their education, their behavior, or their susceptibility to using drugs themselves? Who will take care of them to ensure that they're going to have a proper upbringing? These are uncomfortable questions to ask, but they must be answered. On today's episode, we're going to discuss drug-endangered children and a trend that we are tracking: grandparents raising grandchildren. Today's guest is Conni Dilego. Conni is the Director of Elder Affairs for the Plymouth Council on Aging. Conni is also the Commissioner of the State's Commission on the Status of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. Welcome, Conni.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much for being here.
Conni, it's great to have you.
Thanks a lot.
Some of the questions that we have prepared, I'll ask the first one. What is the Commission on the Status of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, and how did that get started?
Very good question. And I have to correct one thing. I'm a former commissioner. I was on it for 6 years and then retired. It began in 2006, and one of the persons most responsible for it was Representative John Lepper from Abington. And he and his wife were raising two of their granddaughters, have raised two of their granddaughters. And he noticed that more and more people were coming to him with issues that were related to grandparents raising grandchildren. And one of the biggest issues at that point in time, and still, is that there was no financial assistance. And grandparents were using their own funds to take care of these kids, which is, we'll get into that later, but that was one of the things he noticed. And that he did some research and found that this was back in 2005. There was 103,000 kids being raised by their grandparents. No, 103,000 grandparents raising over 11.3 million kids across the state. This is just Massachusetts. And I may have the numbers a little bit skewed. Roughly 30% of the kids being raised by mothers who were working at that time or out of the house or that had just taken care of the kids completely. It was 30% was grandparents raising grandchildren. And so being in the position himself, he began to advocate for grandparents to the state to try and get, well, at the time he was trying very, very hard to get a stipend or some sort of financial recourse for them, similar to kinship care or some of the other programs that do offer a stipend. So that became his battle, and he's still battling it, God bless him. And at that time he had, he was advocating for the money, and we didn't get that. At the same time, unbeknownst to me, because I didn't know Representative Lepper at the time, I was finding the same thing at the Council on Aging. This is back when we were over on Court Street. Yep. And I was new there as a social worker, and I was finding more and more people coming in with this issue that they were grandparents raising grandchildren. And I wasn't aware that that was such a big issue until then. So we started a support group. And through that support group, we began to go into Boston to advocate ourselves, to speak to different commissions and try to get attention to this growing issue. And that's when I met Representative Lepper. And he was also knew very well and still does, and is a friend of Benny DiMacedo's. So that was a connection that started to work really well, and we started to work together to advocate. And eventually, we didn't get any money for the grandparents, but John was able to get a commission, get a legislation passed to begin a commission to determine the status of grandparents raising grandchildren. And from that, once that was formed, and Senator Murray was involved with that as well, and she appointed me to be on the commission, which I was grateful for. And we did a listening tour across the state. That was the first thing we took on as a charge, to determine what the problems were with grandparents. And we went everywhere from Pittsfield to the Cape, you know, trying to, with a listening tour so they could hear what was going on.
What are some of the trends you're seeing right now as it relates to grandparents?
That's a loaded question,
right?
Because there's so many. I think we got, in view of what this show is about, what you're talking about with the opiates, that's the biggest thing. I'd have to say that in our particular group, I can't speak for the whole state, but I can say that I would be not far off by saying 98% of the grandparents that we have are there because their own children are either dead, they overdosed, they're missing, they took off, they're in jail, they're incarcerated, they're in the hospitals, or they're just not present. And they are raising their grandkids because of that.
So like that missing generation.
So it's safe to say that you're finding more grandparents are being placed in that situation, and that number continues to grow?
Oh, it does, absolutely. And what's happening also, I mean, there's a number of issues that they have, but another issue they have is some of these grandparents are also now, because they're in their 50s, 40s, 50s. Some of them, we have, our youngest grandparent in our group is 47.
Wow.
And we have another woman, we had a lady also 84. On the Cape, she was raising 3 children. So it's a diverse area, but I mean, age length, but they also are now taking care of their parents.
Wow.
Some of them. So I can tell you one particular grandmother that we have. She's from Kingston, and she is raising 2 grandchildren. They're twins, and she's had them since they were 1. And there was another child that was with them. That child was too traumatized, and Grandma wasn't able to take care of her. It was very reluctantly that she had to go to somebody who was more trained to take care of these traumatized kids. So this grandmother is raising her 2 children. Now they're 15, and it's amazing because we've had these kids since they were little, and now I'm seeing them in high school, and a couple of them graduated this year. It's been a long-term thing. And Her dad has a severe diabetes and heart condition, and mom has Alzheimer's. So she is on a daily basis taking care of them as well as her 2 kids, and she is not of optimum health. It's nuts, it's crazy. And she wasn't receiving any kind of help, any financial help from DCF or anybody else. So she's done this all on her own.
It's incredible that she's able to do that. I mean,
Oh, it is.
taking care of both generations
Oh,
like
absolutely.
that. And are there more people that have that similar situation? They're
Yep.
at the same time, because they're not that old themselves, quite honestly,
That's right.
47, 50 years old.
They're
And you're-
not, but we
right.
do have we have older grandparents. We have one grandmother who is, she's probably in her late 50s, early 60s. And her husband is older than she, and he's not well. So she's taking care of him on a this is daily care. She's his caretaker, as well as 3 grandchildren. And you know, one thing about these kids, too, is that they're all traumatized. They're all traumatized. And the degree to which they're traumatized is relative to where they came from and what happened. But you figure, you know, they're going along and they've got parents that have been addicted. Now they might have a mother that died in front of them. They've seen parents being shot. They've had drug dealers at the house. They've been molested. They've been horrible things. And so the kids come to the grandmother and grandfather already traumatized, and grandpa and grandma, whoever's taking them, is also traumatized because she or he is now raising these kids because of something happened to her child. You know, whether it was an overdose or the death or whatever, and she's got to
step in.
Yeah, and be able to take care of those kids and not be judgmental and all that other stuff that's going on with it. And it's a really rough road to hoe.
I can imagine, you know, as a society, we're not really equipped to deal with this. And, you know, it's something that we, I suppose in the past, in very limited circumstances, these things would take place when you had a traumatic event or something. But to see it across a whole swath of society the way that it is now.
You know, and in the past, it wasn't unusual for grandma or grandpa to take care of the kids while mom and dad worked. That when we had a nuclear family, we don't have that anymore.
Right.
And so a lot of time, another issue that comes up is if something happens to their son or daughter and they live in Virginia, and grandma's here, the legal ramifications of getting those kids up here. I have another grandmother. She's in her 70s, from New York, and her daughter is here. Her daughter isn't sick, but not capable right this moment of taking care of her own daughter. So grandma moved from New York for a couple of months to take care of her granddaughter. Been here for 3 years. She's not going back. She's now had to sell her house in New York and make a complete upheaval of her life to come out here. There's no life. You don't have any more time. You went from being a grandmother, able to be, you know, grandma's fun and making cookies and things like that, to now you have to be the person taking care of that child. And you lose out being a grandparent. You lose out your retirement. Because a lot of times, not just financially, but if you were going to retire at 65 or 70 and now you're taking care of kids, that's gone. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's an issue. I think a lot of people that maybe watch or will be watching the show are going to say, I never contemplated this. And the good thing is now that they can start to think about this. And then there's going to be another subset of people who are going to look at this and say, I'm living this. Thank you for getting the word out. I think that's important. And
Absolutely.
You touched upon an issue here, I think, that a lot of people are going, you know, is the logical next question. And that is, you know, where can grandparents go for legal assistance? You know, because I imagine when you get yourself involved in the morass that can be the legal system,
it's awful.
How does that go?
It's awful. It's just awful. And there's working really hard on educating people in the courts and DCF and other places so they understand. There are differences in even the court proceedings between if it's a parent and a child and it's a grandparent that's involved and the grandparent is going to be a guardian, take over guardianship.
Yeah.
Until now, and even now, the courts can appoint a lawyer to the child and to the parents, but the grandparents don't have anybody. They don't have an advocate. They can pay for one if they can afford it, and that's another thing. We've had grandparents spending their whole savings just going to the court system. And you know yourself, especially with addiction problems. All right, so you're set to go to court with your son or your daughter to debate this issue or for guardianship, and they don't show up. So you brought your lawyer, you've got to pay for that day, you've got to
Right.
pay for that time, and it just goes on and on. It's a vicious circle with that. But as far as real help for them, I'm afraid they flounder a lot in the courts. Your clerk of courts that are there that can instruct them on which room to go to, but they can't give them any advice. And you have lawyers of the day, some much more educated on the system of grandparents than others. And there's not a lot of them that really understand. We've had, even the state has a senior law advocacy. And until recently, we've had people call that and they'll say, I'm sorry, we don't deal with this. So they have, the grandparent that at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever, gets a call from the police department or the DCF and says, you got to come get your grandchildren or they're going to a foster home. And they dash right over there and they pick up the kids and they leave. Now what? Now what? And how do I manage this? Where do I go? And they'll make all kinds of questions and they won't get any answers. There's no template, we're trying, and the commission is trying. They have got some papers out there. They have a website now that can give you some direction, but unfortunately a lot of the people that you call don't know what they're talking about, or they give misinformation, which is even worse.
Does DCF provide any resources whatsoever once they make that phone call to the grandparents and say, come get your grandkids?
DCF will help if they agree to be foster grandparents. If they go for guardianship, they're not going to get as much help. DCF will usually try to push towards adoption, because once they're adopted or they're legal guardians, they don't have to have, there's no financial tie.
Right.
It's over with. And I say that in sympathy with DCF because of their caseload, but with no sympathy in terms of the way some of these cases are handled. And it's never the same. We have a couple of grandparents in our group who, one will swear how wonderful DCF was to them. She was treated well. She got stipends that she needed. The kids got the food and clothing allotments. She got daycare and mental health, mental care, and the whole thing. But she's the only one in the group that had such good luck. Most of them don't. I'm sorry that they don't. So they flounder, and that's where we come in. But so many people don't know about us. To this day, we'll get people that call, I didn't know you had such a group, and it's not just, it's a support group for grandparents raising grandchildren, but we try to get information to them. We've had several people come over from the police department and the sheriff's department to talk to them about the opiate addiction, what to do. We have had Narcan training. We've had mental health workers come in and give them hints and all, but they're pretty much on their own.
We've seen an explosion really since in 2010 for the care and protections that were being filed in the courts, which is a civil complaint terminating parental rights for some parents who cannot take care of their kids. And I think in 2010 we had roughly 14 different open and care protections in Plymouth County. 4 years later, 146. So you're watching those numbers escalate. Do you find in your role that some of the parents are still going to court to fight for their kids, even though they really can't take care of themselves and might take care of their kids?
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is if they can go in and have a couple of days sober, I can take care of my kids now, but I don't have a place to live. You might get an apartment, you might get help getting a place to live and money for food and stuff. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. They're addicts, and addicts are sick people. And 2 days sober does not make you well. Representative Lepper, one of his biggest battles also was to fight for best interest. Best interest for the child is not always the parents. But the old-fashioned way is, let's reunify them, let's get them sober together and bring them back together. I can tell you, we had a grandparent that came in. She was here 2 years ago, and she and her husband were taking care of her granddaughter because her son and his wife were both addicts. The son had OD'd and gone to the hospital and stuff, like he wasn't married yet, so they took care of the granddaughter. Now, these two grandparents were pretty strict, and they were also very young. But they they came up with a whole list of things that you have to do these things or you're not going to get that child back. They went to the court, they did get custody, the whole thing. They spent all their money doing this too. And so they did finally get DCF involved, and when they got DCF involved, then they were able to get a stipend and they were able to get daycare, all right? And DCF also had a list of qualifications, things you have to meet in order to say that you're well enough to have your child back. So this went on for a year, and her son got sober, got a job. The daughter, the girlfriend of him, they got married, and they were doing pretty well, and she got the kids back. She got the daughter back. In no time at all, she was pregnant again. All right, now it's a young couple trying to find a place to live with rent. You know, they're working minimal jobs, service jobs, you know, trying to find a place to live. That's not happening. They're not having much luck. The car breaks down. They can't get a new car. And, you know, heroin is a lot cheaper than groceries. And so before very long, Grandma had the daughter back, the granddaughter back. And they had just moved to Maine to start their life over when their son got sober. Now they had to take the daughter. They had to go through a lot of rigmarole to get permission. But then they got the daughter, and the granddaughter took her to Maine. Then she had the other baby. Now she's got 2 kids up there in Maine, raising the 2 grandchildren, and the kids, her son and daughter-in-law, are back out. You know, and it's like, the court said yes, we can, and it's hard. I don't know how to make the judgment, because if I were a judge and I see the mother was really striving and I want my kid back, I would be in that position. I really want my kid back. And so I can see having a leaning toward that, but you have to do a little bit more. You have to go a little deeper. Because this is opium. It isn't even like alcohol, you know? The chances of everybody what do they call it, relapsing, are so much greater.
Well, and unfortunately, we see, you know, on our spectrum, you know, in the courts, in the criminal courts, and we just unfortunately recently had a case that was just disposed of a couple weeks ago, where a 5-month-old little girl over in Marshfield was born opiate addicted and eventually died when she was 5 months from their parents' heroin getting into her formula. And she died as a result of that. Now the parents are in custody, and the little girl is gone. She had an older 3- and 4-year-old sibling who have also gone to foster care. They're gone now. And the mother and the father have lost their parental rights forever on those children. And the tragedies that are out there, and I think that's why I'm so glad, you know, what you do and the work that you do in trying to help the grandparents in taking control of really their own futures. I think they realize that their kids, are significantly addicted. And that you've got to help those kids, or else they're going to also end up in foster care. And you're going to see all too often we see that
It's
cycle. The
It's a
cycle of,
cycle.
we see domestic violence, child abuse, and drug abuse. And that's what we end up seeing. And that's why it's so important, I think, to get the grandparents, and, you know, and a normal grandparent's going to, that's my grandkid, that's my blood. I'm going to do anything for that kid, you know. And it's good to see that happening, but we have to, I think, get more resources and make it easier for the grandparents to get those rights, which is a difficult thing to say when you're terminating parental rights. But the life of the child is more important than the rights of the parents.
Well, I think I just got word this morning from the commission that Representative Lepper, he's still the chairman of the commission, and he is asking for a bill to be created to at least get financial support for the grandparents that are, you know, or any working relative that is taking care of the kids, so that they can continue that. But one of the things they need too, both the grandparents and the courts, is education. They really need education. Your system, your symptoms, and the things that are causing these problems. Grandparents, you take a 60 or a 70-year-old grandmother or grandfather that goes in and now has an 18-month-old child, or a 5, or a teenager. There is no resemblance to the life that they were brought up with. None whatsoever. I mean, so how do you do that? How do you cross that bridge? You know, especially the teenagers, where we have some really great grandparents. Well, obviously they're great, or they wouldn't have taken their kids, you know, because there's some that they just admit, I can't do this, and they don't. But we have some that are just phenomenal grandparents, and so they're doing a good job raising their kids. But now we're getting our teenagers, and we're all scared. I'd say we all, the group we have, because we're family now. We've
Yeah.
been all together for
Right.
10 years, so we're family. And we know what they're going through school. I work a lot with the school, and Officer Aaron, that's over there, I can't think of his last name, I'm sorry. And having him come in and talk to the kids, he did a real face-to-face, not scared stiff type of thing, but similar at one of our meetings, to keep them safe.
Yeah, that's important
it's
because
tough.
I can imagine as a parent, I'm not a grandparent yet, but you see that grandchild entering the danger zone.
Absolutely.
And lightning can't strike twice, and it's got to be a terrifying thing.
And these kids are traumatized. We've got some of the kids that are coming out now with things that they're telling, that they're opening up about, that we never knew. Grandparents never knew. Oh my
Right.
God, that happened. And now you not only open up the can of worms of the poor kid going through that trauma again, you've got grandma or grandpa going through, oh my God, I didn't know that. I should have cut in sooner, or my son did that, or my daughter did that, or it's just.
But there is a way, though, when the grandparents do get the rights, when they do assert what they need to over in probate court and get what they need to do, a way for them to get some form of financial help right now, to some extent, or housing. Is there a way that can expedite them to help them get anywhere, or are we log jammed up at the state house right now,
We're log
trying to
jammed.
get something pushed through?
Now we're log jammed. And unless they agree to be foster parents, which most of them don't want to be, they don't want to have DCF or anybody else in their house every day.
Right.
They don't want to be micromanaged like that, because it can be tough. If they don't, then there's no money. There's nothing. I have a woman in my, I don't want to divulge where I live, somewhere near where I live, who is 78 years old. And she just recently took custody of her 18-month-old granddaughter. Grandma is not that well. Grandma's got arthritis, and she fell and broke her shoulder, and now she's got her arm in a sling. An 18-month-old child. All right, no, actually, she's 20 months old now. I took her for a day just to hang out with her, and I was exhausted by the end of the day. And we had to keep calling DCF for services. She had that baby for over 3 months before she got any help. I got help from Old Colony Elder Services with a donation to get her the crib and the mattress and the Pampers and the different things, things that she needed like that should have been given to her day one. Day one. She should have had some sort of assistance, a check of some kind going out the door with that baby in her arms. And then now, she just recently got a voucher for daycare. The vouchers are hard to come by, and there's a log jam on those too. But 78 years old, taking care of an 18-month-old every single day with it. And she'll do it. She's not going to give that baby up.
Right. So but there is an avenue to get some help from the Old Colony then, from the local
A one-time
versus
thing. Well, that's a
versus the
one-time
state.
thing.
Okay.
That's a one-time thing, and just because they know we do the grandparents raising grandchildren. They were sponsoring a group themselves in Brockton, and dissolved. So if I have a grandparent that needs something, I can call Old Colony Elder Services on a one-time basis to get something for like that. But that's not a monthly stipend.
Right.
The problem here is overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
and the assistance that is available really does
underwhelming.
is absolutely, that's a good word to use, is underwhelming. We have thinking about this, and I'm just trying to digest all this as you're saying this. The daunting task that these grandparents face in the legal realm, I'm still not past that. We really need to revamp.
Yep.
The court rules, the statutes to accommodate this. What rights do because I think independent of anything, grandparents should have rights.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's
I can speak to that one loud and clear, because I think they're working on grandparent rights a little bit. To one thing, I know that the commission is working with the Attorney General's office now too, and one of the people from the AG's office did a survey with grandparents to come up with what their needs were and stuff. And they are going to be involved with the grandparents on the next listening tour. When I first heard another listening tour, I just rolled my eyes, because I'm sick of talking.
Right.
I'm really sick of talking and commissions and this and that. Let's do something, right? But I'll take that back, because I think this will work out. I mean, it's a better start, because they're coming in with already having some knowledge on what grandparents need, and going out and say, okay, can you help us address this? How can we fix this? What would help most? Where can we go with this? You know, we all need help with putting Band-Aids on this is all we can do for the time being. But if I might mention that, that's going to be at the Bourne Council on Aging on November 9th from 5:30 to 7 o'clock at the Bourne Council on Aging, and that's going to be a very important meeting. You might even want to go. I think Representative Moratori will be there too,
Yeah.
He's been a huge champion for us at the State House as well as Vinnie. We're blessed with what we have here in this town, which is so much more than other communities have. With the, right from Senator Murray, she was really a big help to us. And other towns and councils on aging call us a lot for how do you do this, how do you do that, and it's because we've had the help, you know, to get that and to bring the awareness to the state level of this problem.
That's why you're coming out and coming on shows like this and getting the word out, because I think a lot of people, although they're aware that there may be an opiate problem, they don't think
know
they
this
see
is-
when you toss a pebble into a pond, there's a ripple effect.
Exactly.
And this is one of the ripples.
It is.
And the problem is how do we make sure that we can help these kids grow up safely? And that's going to be by being in the care and custody of somebody who loves them and who also is related to them.
Right.
What better person for there to be than the grandparent if they're physically able to do it? But we've got to be in a position to get them resources.
Right, really, because I can. Well, there isn't any good news I can tell you on this because it is so, you know, it's just like when you're listening to anything about the opiate addiction crisis, there's no good news right now. But in the past, since we've been open at the Council on Aging, which is, like I said, almost 4 years now, less than, in maybe the last 2.5 years, within our group, we've lost 2 grandparents, one to heart attack, and the other, I think the other was a heart attack also when it's stress related.
Right.
We've had families break up, divorces because grandpa doesn't want it, or this is their second marriage,
Right.
and those aren't his grandkids. So why are you doing this? You're taking time away from me. We were going to retire and go to Florida, where I can't do that now. So they divorce, and we've had 5 deaths of the children of these grandparents, their own children that OD'd.
Wow.
That's only like in 2.5 years.
And this is something that I think many people are unaware of. And I have to confess that I was not fully aware before today, the dimension of this. And I do know somebody who is in this situation. Luckily for them, their grandparents are young enough and healthy enough that it has not been an issue. But I can't imagine what it must be like for
the elders?
some of these seniors, to have to deal with that. And
a lot of them too, we have some good, stable situations, but we have a lot of situations too with grandparents. They're not rich. You know, unfortunately, that whole cycle that maybe got their child on addiction, maybe came from an alcohol addiction. Alcohol used to be the big problem.
Right.
You know, now it's cheaper to get high on heroin. But we have a lot of the grandparents that just don't have enough money to live on. They really don't. Or we have people living on Social Security. If you've got a grandmother or a grandfather on $700 a month Social Security, how does that work?
Right.
How does that work?
Right.
Well, I'm hopeful all the work that you're doing and that the Representative Moratori and Senator DiMacedo and all the other people down our way, our legislators, can be very helpful, as I'm sure they are, trying to get the resources that are necessary. Because I know we've worked with them also, not with marijuana issues and opiate issues. We're all aware of it. And I think getting involved in it sometimes, I know the sheriff and I involved in our drug task force, is trying to get our arms around it and figure out, here's the problem, but it's much more unwieldy than what you originally think it was. And this is, to me, it sounds like it's an incredibly important way to, once again, stop that cycle. And that's something that we have to do, and we should all be talking to our legislators regarding making sure we're getting the appropriate funding for the grandparents who, you're right, they're on limited income, limited budgets, and they can barely afford, I'm sure, to keep themselves going.
Right.
Never mind a child who needs toys, attention, sports,
Mental
all the
health.
things that kids do, right, all those things
Yep.
right there, who have already been
sure.
significantly traumatized.
Yep, and sports, you have to pay for that now.
Right.
When I was in school, you didn't have to pay to play football or basketball. Now it's everything, and then the uniforms and the buses, and it's really hard. I think one of the things that's going to help is that with this AG commission that is going to go around, that did the survey, one of the things they found is that they need to provide legal representation for the grandparent at court. You know, like I said before, you have
Sure.
the child has a representative, and so does the parent. But until now, and including right now, we're hoping it changes, there's no help for the grandparent.
That's a very important point. And I think one of the most important changes that we need to make sooner than later is to establish that grandparents do have rights. I can remember years ago when I first began practicing law 25 years ago that, you know, having done a little bit of family law, seeing family dynamics that weren't so great, not necessarily
Yeah.
because of drugs, but grandparents coming to me and saying, we want to see our grandchild,
Oh, yeah.
but the kids won't let us.
That's a big one. I can.
It would break my heart to say
speak
there's
personally to that.
nothing that I could do about it
Yep.
because the grandparents
that
had
we
no
didn't
rights.
have the right. I unfortunately found myself in a similar situation, and it's a case of at that time all the mother has to say is, well, I don't want her in the family. You know, the father, we don't want the father, we don't want the mother, we
Right.
don't want that family.
And there
You
was
have no
nothing-
recourse.
There was
No
nothing you could do.
recourse. No.
And I remember having to tell that to people, and
Can you? I mean, it's heartbreaking
yeah, it was.
to have a grandchild that's 25 years old or something, and you haven't seen that child since he was 5.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I think the laws are changing on that. I believe now, in order for that to happen, to be that bad, you have to prove that the grandparent is unfit.
Well, that's something I'm going to do a little research on. Well, first off, I'm curious.
Great.
But secondly, I need, and I think Tim and I will both talk to some of our colleagues in the Bar Association and see, because I know that they must have dealt with this issue as well. And I do know we're very blessed once again in Plymouth because we have a district bar association, and I do know that they train lawyers to go in there and be part of that Lawyer of the Day program. And those lawyers are giving their own time. They don't get paid
Oh, I know
for
that. But they need to be educated on
Right.
the issues
Yeah.
of the grandparents.
And you know, we need to take that, the education, and we need to educate our legislators
Yes.
and let them know that something has got to change, and it's got to change fast.
And the hard part about it, I mean, there's only that much money in the pot. I recognize that, and all of us are screaming and, you know, trying. We all need a piece of that. But come on, grandparents. I wish I had the numbers. That's what I was trying to get before I came in. The millions and millions of dollars that grandparents are saving this state by raising these kids by themselves with no help. You know what's the cost to raise a child today?
Yeah, it's
a couple
incredible.
$100,000 or something like
It's
that.
incredible.
And this is what they're doing on their own.
And you know, and I think the word that you taught, the trauma that these kids are going into these new relationships with, even they're their grandparents. But it's
Right.
one thing seeing your grandparent every other weekend
Yeah.
to versus all of a sudden you're living with that person.
Yep.
And you know, one of the things we tried in our office a few years back was dealing with, we were dealing with kids who were victims of domestic violence. And what we were doing, because there's all these barriers, you can't tell if something terrible happens at a kid's house on a certain night.
Right.
The police are prohibited from talking to the schools and telling the schools, hey, listen, something's going on with Johnny. So what we developed something, and now we're actually trying to change it for the opiates also.
Right.
So that if something does happen terrible at a home, whatever it may be, that if nothing else, that there's a program that came out of West Virginia they call Handle with Care, in which you don't give the specifics, but you call up the school the next day and the police officer can say, hey, listen, remember Johnny Doe,
Yeah.
handle him with care. Now, that's all they say. They
Yeah.
don't tell him what happened, because that next day, a kid who may be normally very quiet and maybe he's just sitting in the background, all of a sudden he's acting out, he's doing something
Yep.
that he saw, he's reinventing that wheel. And that's one small step, but it's not the big picture. And,
No.
and I think that's really where we're at, trying to figure
Right.
out how do we deal with
But
these
you bring up
issues.
another issue, and that's this whole thing with the schools. Unless the grandparent now goes to DCF and actually gets legal guardianship or foster or adoption, I can't go into the school and pick him up after school. You have to get all kinds
Right.
of
Right.
rules and laws and
Yeah.
contracts signed and so on and so
Right? Or
forth.
consent to medical treatment and
Yep,
things like
HIPAA.
that. Yeah.
Then you have also the problem of, again, with these kids being traumatized, if the teachers don't know, and the guidance counselors don't know, we try to work with them. We send them notes. We send them updates on what's going on in it. But everybody is so overworked with everything they're doing that I'm afraid this one slips through the cracks too. We have a couple of instances I know of where the child was extremely traumatized to the point of not talking. All right. And I know that they're trained, teachers are trained to work with kids that are mute or that aren't speaking and everything, get around them. But then this child started acting out and became a behavior problem, and they were going to kick him out and the other thing. And it's like the whole thing was based on, I miss my mom. Where's my mother? Where's she going? Is she ever going to come back? Where'd she go? Why did Dad hurt her? Why did he? You know, and the whole. But we,
Right.
you know, it's not up to the schools. I know that to get into this situation, but. I don't know. Some of the backstory has to be explained because otherwise the kid doesn't get the little bit of extra help they need, and they get labeled. They get labeled and they get bullied.
And they feel abandoned.
Oh,
because
my God,
their
yeah.
parents are gone.
Absolutely.
And
And the
with
kids
that-
make fun of them. Oh, yeah, what's your grandmother doing here? You living with your grandmother?
Right.
And with that come a whole raft of psychological issues that that child will have to deal with and
Yep.
have to
And
face.
if we don't fix it, they're going to be the ones out there doing these things
Right.
and committing horrible crimes. And
Right. Well, I mean, you people have certainly done the COA and your prior role as a former commissioner. You've done an incredible job, and I really applaud your efforts coming out publicly and getting the word out, and that we need to all continue to work with our local representation to make sure that there is some changes in the law which allow the grandparents what they need to have. While at the same time, you want to preserve everything that's intact, and everybody has rights, and they're entitled to hearings, all such as that. But
It's a
still,
tough-
it's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, it really
because there's a
is.
lot of different people with
Yep.
different rights, and at the end of the day,
Yep.
once again, what's in the best interest of that child?
That's the
where
bottom
to go.
line.
And that's got to be
That's gotta be the bottom line,
focus, I
yeah.
think, of the overall.
because I think we're a little
situation.
overprotective sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a very popular person for saying that, but we can't get any information. You can't share anything. You can't do anything. You can't wear anything. I mean, it's just everybody has a no attitude, and the kids, where they go? Where do they go? You
Right.
know, who do they ask? Who
Right.
do they talk to?
Right.
And the grandparents, I would love to have more people under. We have the grandparents group, support group, and we're 10 years old, and I'm really proud of that, and I'm proud of what they've achieved, and they're speaking out. One of our grandparents was actually made Grandmother of the Year for a magazine.
God bless.
great.
Yeah, yeah. But here, I'm getting old. I forgot where I was going with this. All right.
Yeah,
We'll pick up something else. I know it was important, and I'll come right back to. Grandparents. I would love them to know that we have the support group. We have it every Thursday. We haven't changed that in a long time. Every Thursday from 10 o'clock in the morning till 11:30, and it often goes to 12 or 12:30.
At the COA.
At the COA, yep. Every single Thursday. We don't miss it. And we meet the first Tuesday of every month. We have family night. We meet at 5:30. We have supper, pizzas or something for the kids. And then we eat, and then we'll split. The kids go off, and we used to have a sitter, but now the kids are the sitters. And then the grandparents get together. We usually have a speaker, or the kids will have a speaker or something like that. But we get together, and because that's a time for these kids to be able to share with other kids that are in the same boat, because
Right.
they don't know other kids in school that have that, you know. So that's been a very successful meeting, and we have more people at that one. But just by the conversations I have with people in town, we know that there's so many more people, and I don't know how we can reach them. We made flyers, we've made posters, we put them out at the courthouse. I work with a partner, Barbara, from the South Shore Women's Resource Center, and she's phenomenal. She's another social worker, and she's terrific, and she's an advocate over at the court. God bless her, because she really helps a lot of people over there.
Yes.
I don't know if you know her or not, but she's really great. And she and we've made flyers. I've made not flyers, brochures. I've made over 3,000 that we've distributed over the past, since we've been here in the last 3 years, right? They're all gone. She puts them up in the court and they're gone. So somebody's picking them up. How do we get you to come in? You know, that's what I would really love.
Right.
We can help. Even if it's not a venting, it's not a gripe session.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, your information helps me, my information helps you,
Right.
you know? So that's why I like to do this.
Well, doing
That's why I like
something
to
like
get
this
out.
is crucial to that.
Yeah, it is.
And maybe
It
we
really
can
is.
talk to the good folks here about doing some public service announcements.
Yeah.
I think those would be very, very important. You know, we need to. This is a big project, but it's something. You know, these kids are our future.
They are. And I'm thrilled. I'm really so grateful that you asked me to come in and talk about this, because
Well, we're thrilled
as you
you
can
came.
see, that it's big, and you know, we've been beating our breasts and pounding on tables for 10 years, and it's like finally, okay, I don't care how long it takes,
Right.
and I don't care who gets the word out as long as it gets out there.
And I would say, once I know you're on Facebook, but social media
Yep.
is what I'm told when we have meetings. Sometimes people don't get all of our notifications, but Twitter and all those things, and things are always constantly changing. But sometimes when you're on that can get even more
I guess I'll
information
have to
out.
get Twitter. I
You
don't
know,
know how to do
and get on that list and get it
Yeah.
out there. I think it's important.
Well, we have constant contact, and we have a
Great.
big group of the PNG group and the Plymouth Cares group, and we
Sure.
try to get it out. But it's the grandparents I want to come in. You know.
Right.
It's-
Right.
Yeah, it is the dimension of this problem. You know, the opiate crisis that we face is magnified so much when you think about the collateral issues. This being one of them. All of those lives that are affected, and you know, this is sitting and talking with you and thinking about these issues going forward. You know, I think I want to make sure that, you know, I am involved.
Thank you.
And helping to draft some of this legislation. You know, we need to.
That would be so good.
We need statutes
We
that
do.
are going to be reflective of reality,
Yep.
because I don't think that they are at present.
No,
We
they're
need-
not.
But you know, the good news is we got a lot of great people we can talk to in the legislature about that. We need to. I know you talk. There's limited resources. That's always the case, but I can't think of a more important item upon which.
Now,
for
when you,
us
like you
to
said, when you
expend our
consider the
resources.
depth of this and the future of this, you got to spend a little bit of money, a little bit more on prevention, you know, and taking care of grandparents is prevention.
Right.
It is, and as you correctly pointed out, by having these grandparents who are willing, and I'm sure that the vast majority are willing, but those who are able, the amount of money that is going to be saving the state in foster care and other things is tremendous. We have to consider that.
Yes.
Because I think the dimension of this problem is easy to underestimate because of the great things that our grandparents are doing. And like you said, the world has changed. When I was a kid, my grandparents were very actively involved in raising me, as important as my parents were. But we didn't have these other issues to deal
Right.
with. And how people can deal with that today is a mystery to me. So I want to make sure that you know, we get involved
Yeah.
and get as much
I'll
information.
call you
out
on
there.
that.
I hope you will.
You know,
And
and
if
we
you
don't
don't, I'll
have, like,
call you.
please, we don't have, grandma doesn't live next door,
Right.
you know, so we don't necessarily have that wonderful connection that
Right.
we used to have. And,
Right.
and grandparents are a lot different than, I never had, my grandparents were deceased before I was born, so I never even knew my grandparents. And I was raised by an older sister because my parents died. I was one of those change-of-life babies. So I was raised by a kin. You know, my sister was 20 years older than me. And, I mean, Obama was raised by his grandmother. Governor Patrick Deval was raised by his grandmother. But it was a different story. You know, it was a different story. Today's grandparents are well, they're still working. A lot of them are still working. A lot of them, like I said, are taking care of their own parents now because that other generation is dying out, is getting more feeble. So yeah, it's pretty tough.
Well, the dimension of this issue is much greater than I realized. So I thank you for letting me know, and I thank you for letting the wider audience know that's out there. I think this is important for us to get a handle on, you know, because as I said, these kids are our future.
Yeah, they are.
You know?
They are.
I have my own children at home, and as we're sitting here, we're talking. I have a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I rely very heavily on my in-laws and my parents. And God bless, you know, they are always there for us when work issues come up or things like that, and they enjoy the time with the kids. But I can't imagine a situation where they would have to find themselves in that role.
Right.
So it's
And you know, the kids that go through these traumas and stuff, they're still, parents are parents. So to them, even though their father or their mother may have been abusive as hell, pardon me, but as heck, and or drug addicts and falling down drunk in front of them, or doing prostitution in the house, whatever the situation was, it's still their parent.
That's right.
And their devotion and their love for that parent is still there. So now you've got grandma or grandpa. They're not going to try and dissuade them from loving their parents, but they have to have them start relying on them and loving them in this position. It's, you know, and the kids get heartbroken because their parents are not capable of following through. They're not capable of being there for their birthday. They're not capable of going to the football game or watching them play hockey. I'll be there Sunday.
Right.
Not going to happen.
And the other argument is when you talk about resources that need to be put for the grandkids, is that the front end of those monies is the smart move, not the back end.
Right.
The back end is the district attorney. The back end is the police. The back end is the sheriff. And we're going to be dealing with the same issues. So therefore, we need to make sure we front end that money, I think, and help the people that are taking care of those kids break that cycle, or at least minimize that cycle to the extent that you can. You're never going to break it, I think, 100%. But I think then in the big picture, yes, it may cost you a little more up front, but in actuality, you're saving money overall.
Right.
And it's also the right thing to do.
It is. They just recently passed where the grandparents can apply for the meals at school, free lunch.
Free lunch program.
Oh, good.
Just, I guess, regardless of the salaries, because that was before. Okay, so yes, I have a little bit of money, but if I keep buying lunches, I've got 3 grandchildren here that I'm taking care of. That goes away really quickly.
Right.
So they finally passed a bill where they can get the free lunch for kids, that's a step.
Right.
That's a step.
Out of curiosity, are there any other bills that they've passed or anything pending that is helpful for people to know about?
Funny you should ask. I do. I just got this hot off the press, I should say. These are not passed yet, but I do know that these are some bills, legislation that the commission is working on right now. As I said, Representative Leppert, well, he's retired, but he's working on a bill that would provide relative caregivers with child care. That's the grandparents with child care. The other one is the appointment of counsel for guardians. That needs to be passed.
Right. Yeah, we had
Right.
spoken about that a little bit.
Yep. Directing courts to create guardianship placement plans. Directing courts to come up with these plans so that not only does grandmother or grandfather get custody of the child through the courts, but the mother and father of the child have to adhere to certain things in order to get them back. And they have to do that. Not, well, I went to a meeting.
Right.
Okay? Stringent rules. Despite the tears and the wailing, you have to, because too often they get them back and it doesn't work.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to read, and I want to reiterate too, that these are things that the Attorney General's office found with a survey, and they haven't been put into place yet, but these are things we're going to bring up to the legislature.
Okay.
So this is way on time. Establishing burdens and standards for removing a guardian. This would explicitly determine the party's legal burdens when a parent petitions to remove a guardian. Under this provision, the parent would first have to show a preponderance of the evidence that she has substantially complied with guardianship placement plan and is currently fit to parent the child. The guardian would then have the opportunity to block removal if she can show by clear and convincing evidence that termination of the guardianship would not be in the best interest of the minor. So that's where we were talking earlier, when the parents go in and say, I want the child back, well, they have to prove that they've adhered to what the court told them they had to do. And if grandma wants to block that, she or he have to prove reasons that they haven't lived up to their bargain, and it's not in the best interest for the child. That whole best interest thing is so vague, and it's so determined on what the judge is hearing and who's presenting it, and until the grandparent had the right now to have an attorney, they often didn't get to say anything.
Right.
So you've got mom and dad crying up there, and you've got DCF saying, oh no, I'm going to bring them back, they're good. And
So if they can't comply with that criteria, then that is not in the best interest of the
correct.
child. Right. That's the way I look at
Yep,
it. You know what I mean? So if
absolutely.
you need to do those 5 steps, 10 steps, whatever it is,
Yep.
and no stories,
Right.
come in and let's
Yep.
see what you've done, and
Absolutely.
have you quote unquote substantially complied, and
Yeah.
the judge make the determination.
And that runs into the old there was a presumption, a legal presumption,
Absolutely.
that the best interest of the child was to be with the
The family.
parents, and clearly in these instances that is not always
Right.
the case. And even if it is in this small snapshot of time, it may not be in the extended
Right.
best interest of that child. So we're going to have to look at these things. We're going to have to look at the legal presumptions. We're going to have to look at the court rules. We're going to have to revamp this whole thing. So hopefully we can get some of our colleagues in the Bar Association to be interested in
So happy to hear
this.
this. I'm so happy to hear this.
Yeah, and I know, there's
so
a lot
happy to hear this.
of very good people in the Bar Association who will be standing by
Right.
to help us with this.
And I know there are too, and I don't mean to come down hard on the courts or anything like that. It's ignorance, and I don't mean that it's just when you don't know something, and you don't know what you don't know.
Which once again is why this is good. Every little bit helps. I think you get
Yeah.
it out there so people
Yeah.
understand that there's problems and there's challenges and that people need to understand them. And we can't use the same rules we used 15 years ago because we're living in a different world.
Exactly.
And I think that's a good
Exactly.
thing.
Can we ask you this on behalf, I'll go out on a limb on behalf of the DA, could we ask you maybe to come and speak to the District Bar Association at some point in time?
I'd be more than happy to.
Because I think you'll find that they are a good audience for listening, but they may have a lot of ideas to put forward on this as well.
I would be more than happy to do
I
that.
think that
Thank
would
you
be
very
a-
much for that offer.
That would be a great
Yeah.
thing. That would be great.
All right.
Time to wrap it up?
Yeah, we can. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't perhaps touch on during the course of this?
With all my notes in here, I don't think so. I think we really we covered a lot of information with your questions and the discussions. I just want people to understand and to really get a grip, to get some understand what's going on. I want the grandparents to know that there's help. It's hard to find, but at least start with us. If there's no place else, start with us. The Grandparents Commission does have a website, and if you just go to mass.gov and put in grandparents, or just type in grandparents raising grandchildren, there are other states doing a lot more than we're doing.
That raises a point that I had wanted to mention before. Sometimes, the best ideas don't necessarily come from us. We look
Absolutely.
to other states,
Yep.
and hopefully we can do some of that as well.
Yeah, Florida's good. I mean, there's a lot of other states that are good. The housing issue, we didn't even talk about housing issues. Housing is really bad. So I guess it's time for I'm
Time for us to
getting
wrap it
the
up, I
circle.
think, right?
Yeah. But I will continue this
great.
anytime I
Thank
want,
you.
and I will speak
Great.
wherever you ask me to.
Well, thank you, Conni. This is great information to have, even though we've only scratched the surface. I want to thank you for joining us today. And that concludes this episode of Breaking the Cycle. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like more information regarding grandparents raising grandchildren, please visit their website at www.massgrg.com. That's www.massgrg.com. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of Breaking the Cycle.